The contract had been drawn up on a Tuesday. Nora Calloway had signed it with the same pen she used for grocery lists, which she thought afterward said everything worth saying about the nature of the arrangement. Her name next to his. 2 signatures, 1 witness, and a date in the corner that would become, technically speaking, the beginning of her marriage. She had not met Edmund Hale before the day they signed. She had seen a photograph. Her aunt had produced it from an envelope with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had decided the matter and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. He was tall in the photograph, dark-eyed, standing beside a fence post with his arms crossed, and an expression that revealed nothing except that he was a man accustomed to being looked at and uninterested in performing for the camera. He looked, Nora thought, like a man who had made his peace with something difficult, and was not going to discuss it. She had signed the contract anyway. Her reasons were not complicated. She was 24, with no family left except the aunt, who had her own household and her own particular patience for situations that had run past their natural end. There was a small inheritance, practical money, not comfortable money, and the understanding that it would last 2 years at most if she was careful, and less if she was not. She had considered her options the way you consider a hand of cards when none of them are what you hoped for. Then she had picked the best one available and played it. Edmund Hale owned land west of Kiowa Bend. Good land, the aunt said. More than good. One of the largest working ranches in that part of the territory, though the aunt said this with the particular care of someone presenting a number without wanting to make it the point. He needed a wife for reasons she did not entirely explain. Nora did not ask her to. The church was cold. It was a Thursday in October, and the cold had arrived the way October cold always arrived in that part of the country, without apology, without gradual introduction, simply there one morning as though it had always been, and the warmth had been the temporary condition. There were 4 people in the pews: the aunt, the minister's wife, a hired man from the ranch who stood in the back with his hat in both hands and the expression of someone who had been asked to witness a thing he did not fully understand, and an older man, silver-haired, who Nora later learned was Edmund's foreman and closest friend, though at the time she only knew him as the man who cried quietly and without embarrassment during the ceremony, which she found unexpectedly moving. Edmund stood at the front of the church and watched her walk toward him. He did not smile. He did not look away. He watched her the way a man watches something he has made a decision about and is now in the process of confirming. She reached him. She looked up at him properly for the first time. His eyes, she would think later, were not cold. They were careful. There was a difference. She had been around cold people enough to know what that looked like, and it looked like nothing, an absence of engagement. Edmund Hale's eyes were the eyes of a man who was very much present and very much choosing, in each moment, exactly how present to be. They said the words the minister gave them. She meant hers in the way you mean a thing you have decided to do well, because the alternative is to do it badly, and she had never been able to bring herself to do a thing badly. He slid the ring onto her finger. His hands were warm. She had not expected that. The drive to the ranch took most of a morning. Edmund drove. Nora sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap, watching the land change as they moved west, the town giving way to open country to the particular vast stillness of the territory that she had read about, but never actually stood inside of. It was bigger than she had understood it would be, not just the land. The quiet. Edmund said almost nothing for the first hour. She said almost nothing for the first hour. Neither of them seemed distressed by this, which she noted with something that might have been relief. At one point, a hawk crossed the road far ahead of them, low and unhurried, and without planning to, she said, "I've never seen one do that. Stay that low." He looked at where it had been. "They do it when the wind's right," he said. "They can read it better than we can." She looked at him. He was already looking back at the road. It was the longest thing he had said since the church. The ranch house came into view just before noon. A long, solid structure, 2 stories, with good bones, and the look of a place that had been built to last rather than to impress. There were outbuildings beyond it, a barn that was larger than she had expected, fields that stretched in every direction toward a horizon that seemed to exist at a different distance than horizons had any right to be. Edmund carried her trunk without discussion. He showed her through the house with the efficiency of a man who had prepared what he intended to show and intended to show it without embellishment. The kitchen, which was large and faced south, and caught the afternoon light in a way that transformed it. The sitting room, which had bookshelves along 2 walls and a fireplace that had been recently swept. The bedroom, and here he was plain about it, the way she would come to learn. He was plain about things that mattered. It was hers. He had his own room at the other end of the hall. If she needed anything in the night, there was a lamp on the side table and a bell on the window ledge. He said it without awkwardness. She received it without awkwardness. She would think about that later. How neither of them had made it uncomfortable. How they had stood in the doorway of that bedroom and managed between them a kind of mutual dignity that she had not been sure the situation would allow. He went out to see to the horses. She stood at the window of her new bedroom and looked out at a field she did not yet know the name of, in a life she had not yet begun to understand, and she told herself what she always told herself when the ground felt unsteady, one thing at a time. Start with what's in front of you. What was in front of her was a window facing west, and a sky going gold at the edges. She unpacked her trunk and started there. The first weeks had a shape to them that she recognized, eventually, as the shape of 2 careful people learning the dimensions of a shared space without colliding. Edmund was up before sunrise without exception. By the time Nora came downstairs, he had already been in the barn, already spoken to the foreman, already made decisions about the day that she was not yet part of and did not yet understand. He appeared in the kitchen doorway each morning with the particular energy of a man who had already done a full morning's work before most people had opened their eyes, and he said good morning the same way every time, directly, without flourish, as though good morning was a statement of fact he was confirming rather than a pleasantry he was performing. She made breakfast. He ate it. He said, "Thank you." He left. In the afternoons, if the work allowed, he came back to the house for an hour. Sometimes he sat at the desk in the study. Sometimes he stood on the back porch and looked at the southern field with the expression of a man calculating something invisible. Once, she came around the corner of the house and found him crouched beside the old dog. A gray-muzzled cattle dog who spent most of his days asleep in patches of sun, and speaking to it quietly in the way people speak to animals when they think no one is listening. There was something in his face at that moment that she had not seen before. Not the careful watchfulness that was his ordinary expression. Something younger, something that had not yet made its peace with things. He looked up and saw her and stood, and that expression was gone. She did not comment on it. She went back inside. But she thought about it. She was learning him the way you learn a place you have been dropped into without a map, by observation, by small accumulated evidence, by the particular intelligence that comes from paying close attention to things, rather than rushing to conclusions. She had always been good at that. Her family had called it quietness. She had come to understand it was something more deliberate than that. Edmund Hale, she was beginning to see, was not what she had expected. She had expected cold efficiency, the operation of a man who had acquired what he needed and would now manage it appropriately. She had expected to feel, in this house, the way she had felt for most of her life. Present but peripheral, occupying a space that had been assigned to her rather than one she had chosen. She did not feel that way. She felt, and she tested this observation carefully before admitting it to herself. She felt like someone whose presence had been accounted for. Not warmly, not yet, not in any way that would have been visible to an outside observer, but accounted for, as though Edmund Hale had made room for her in his house and in his day with a deliberateness that was something other than indifference. It was not love. She was not confused about that, but it was not nothing either. It was on a wet evening in the 5th week, the rain coming hard against the windows, the horses restless in the barn, the kitchen smelling of the beef stew she had made with what she'd found in the larder. And her mother's recipe held steady in her memory that the first real conversation happened. She had set the table. Edmund had come in from the barn late, dripping at the doorframe, and she had handed him a towel without thinking, the way you hand someone a towel when they are obviously wet, and he had taken it with a look of slight surprise, as though small practical kindnesses were not yet in the inventory of things he expected from her. They sat at the table. The rain did not let up. She had been thinking all day about a question she was not sure she had the right to ask. She asked it anyway, because she had learned that waiting for certainty before speaking was a way of never speaking at all. "Can I ask you something?" Edmund set down his fork. "Yes." "Why did you agree to this?" She kept her voice even. "The arrangement. Your foreman told me you've had chances before. Women who were interested. Families who would have been glad to have an alliance." She looked at him directly. "You could have had a conventional marriage. Why didn't you?" The silence that followed was not the silence of a man avoiding the question. It was the silence of a man deciding how honestly to answer it. "I was engaged once," he said. 8 years ago. She was a good woman. We suited each other practically, and we both understood that." He paused. 3 months before the wedding, she told me she had come to feel something for someone else. Something she hadn't expected. He looked at the window. "She asked if I would release her from the arrangement." "And did you?" "Yes." Nora waited. "It was the right thing to do," he said. "I knew that. I don't blame her for it. But after that, I couldn't." He stopped. He picked up his fork and set it down again. "I decided that practical arrangements were cleaner. I wasn't interested in being someone's second choice again, because I had failed to be whatever it is that makes a person feel something unexpected." The rain came harder. The lamp on the table made a small, warm circle in the middle of all that weather. "That isn't a failure," Nora said carefully. "That's just. Sometimes people find themselves somewhere they didn't plan to be. It doesn't mean you lacked something." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't yet fully read. "You're generous," he said. "I'm accurate," she said. "There's a difference." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Very small. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, filed away for later. They finished dinner. The rain stayed. Neither of them got up from the table immediately after the meal was done, which had not happened before, and which neither of them remarked on, but which Nora noted with the part of her mind that catalogued these things quietly and without conclusion. October gave way to November. The cold established itself with finality. Nora learned the ranch in pieces. The foreman, whose name was Walt, and who had the particular gift of explaining things, without making you feel you should have already known them, showed her how the water system worked, which fields were which, what the horses were called, and which ones had opinions about being approached from the left. He showed her these things with the manner of a man who had been told to help her, and had decided, privately, that he actually wanted to. She learned which floorboards in the hall announced themselves at night. She learned that the kitchen window stuck in the cold and had to be opened from the bottom rather than the top. She learned that Edmund's foreman arrived each morning at 6:30, and that they stood by the fence for exactly 20 minutes before the day began, and that whatever was said in those 20 minutes set the tone for everything that followed. She learned that Edmund read at night, late, long after the house had gone quiet. She could see the light under his door when she went to the kitchen for water in the small hours. And once she heard him laugh, low and brief, at something on the page, a sound so unguarded that she stood in the hallway for a moment, just to confirm she had heard it correctly. She had. She went back to bed thinking that she was adding items to a list she had not meant to start keeping. The thing that changed between them. And she would not be able to say afterward what exactly changed it, only that it changed. Began on a morning in mid-November when she went looking for the flower and found it had been moved to a higher shelf. She was standing on her toes, not quite reaching it, when Edmund came into the kitchen and took it down without comment and set it on the counter beside her. "I moved it," he said. "The lower shelf had a softboard. I should have told you." She looked at him. "You fixed the shelf?" "2 days ago. I haven't gotten to restocking it properly." He paused. "I'll move it back." "No," she said. She looked at the shelf. "I'll get a step. There's one in the pantry. I know. I put it there." He looked at her. She looked at him. And something in that exchange, something in the mutual knowledge of small household things, the step stool she had moved, and the shelf he had fixed, the ordinary accumulated detail of two people sharing a space, registered between them with a weight that was disproportionate to its content. He moved to make coffee. She began on the bread. They worked in the kitchen in silence for 20 minutes, but it was not the silence of strangers. It had some other quality to it, the quality of two people who had stopped bracing for the other person and had started simply being in the same room. That evening, he stayed at the supper table after the meal. Not long. 15 minutes. But he asked her about Missouri. She had mentioned it once, in passing, and when she told him about it, about the particular green of the summers there, about the way the towns felt smaller than the sky, about her mother who had kept a garden, and her father who had kept his feelings to himself, and left her uncertain whether that was strength or damage, he listened with the full, unhurried attention of a man who was actually interested and had nothing to prove by pretending otherwise. She told him more than she had intended. He offered less than she had told him, but what he offered was real. His mother, who had died when he was 16, and whose presence was still in this house, in the placement of windows and the angle of the porch. His brother, who had gone east and made a different life, and with whom there was a civil silence that had replaced what had once been something warmer. The ranch itself, which he had loved as a child with the uncomplicated love of someone who does not yet know that love requires maintenance. He still loved it. She could hear that. It was in the way he said the south field, or the ridge on the eastern boundary, with a directness that in another context might have seemed ordinary, but in this one felt like an admission. "It's something to have a place that's yours," she said. He looked at her. "You'll have it too," he said, "if you want it." She was quiet for a moment. "I'd like that," she said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it entirely. December arrived with snow that came sideways off the high plains and built itself against the north side of every structure on the ranch, until the barn looked like it was leaning into the wind to stay upright. The work became harder. The days became shorter. The house became a thing they inhabited together in a way they hadn't before, necessarily closer, necessarily more present, because the cold demanded it, and neither of them was the kind of person who retreated from what was necessary. Edmund showed her how the furnace worked, the old iron one in the basement that needed stoking twice a day, or the pipes would suffer. He showed her without impatience, twice, because the first time she had not entirely understood the mechanism, and she had said so plainly, and he had simply shown her again. This small thing, the willingness to show her again without making her feel the lack, had registered somewhere she had not expected. She brought him coffee on the days he spent working in the cold, not because it was her role, because he was out there in the kind of cold that took the feeling from your hands in 15 minutes, and she had the coffee and the ability to walk it out to him, and there was no reasonable argument against doing it. He accepted it each time with the same words. Thank you, but the way he said it changed over those weeks. The first times, it was courteous. By December, it had become something warmer, something that had the texture of genuine feeling rather than performed gratitude. She noticed. She filed it away. On Christmas Eve, she found him in the study after supper, standing at the window with a glass of whiskey he had not touched, looking out at the snow. She almost left him to it. She came in instead and sat in the chair by the fire and picked up her book and did not say anything. He did not say anything. The fire made its sounds. The snow made its silence. After a while, he said, without turning from the window, "My mother used to make something. For Christmas. I don't know what it was called. Some kind of cake. She only made it once a year." Nora looked up from her book. "Do you remember what was in it?" He turned then, and there was something in his face that had not been armored properly. Whether he had lowered it intentionally or simply forgotten to maintain it, she didn't know. "Oranges," he said, "and something else. Spice, I never asked her what it was." She looked at him for a moment. "I might be able to work it out," she said carefully, "if you can describe how it tasted." He looked at her. The firelight did something particular to his face in that moment, made it look less like the careful exterior she had spent 2 months learning, and more like what was behind it. "I would like that," he said quietly. She set down her book. They sat by the fire for another hour. He told her about Christmas on the ranch when he was young, before his mother died, before the particular weight of responsibility had settled across his shoulders and changed the way he held himself in the world. He told her about it with a plainness that was not distance, but a kind of deliberate honesty. "This is what it was, and it mattered, and I am trusting you with that." And Nora sat across from him and understood that this was the most he had given her of himself since October. She gave him something back. She told him about the last Christmas with her parents, the year before her mother got sick, and everything changed. The way her mother had sung badly and refused to be embarrassed about it. The way her father had given her mother a gift so perfectly chosen that he had clearly been planning it for months. And how that had been the only time she ever saw her father be, without guarding himself, completely devoted. "That's what I always thought love looked like," she said. "Not the grand version. Just someone paying that much attention." Edmund was quiet for a moment. "I think you're right," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with those careful, present eyes, and she thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that this man was paying attention, had been paying attention since October, had been building, with that patient engineer's precision, a knowledge of her that she had not asked him to build, and had not been aware of until just now. She didn't know what to do with that. She went to bed not knowing what to do with it, and lay awake for a while in the dark, with her hands folded on her chest, and the snow outside, and the warmth of the house around her. And she thought about her mother's gift and her father's months of planning, and the way love, apparently, announced itself not in declarations, but in accumulated evidence. She was not sure what she was naming. She was not ready to name it. She told herself to sleep. Eventually, she did. January brought the hardest cold of the year, and a crisis with the south pasture fence that required 3 days of brutal repair work in temperatures that had no business being survivable. Edmund came in at the end of the 3rd day, looking like a man who had been in a fight with the weather and had won through sheer stubbornness rather than any advantage. She had food on the table, and the furnace banked high, and when he sat down and she set the plate in front of him, he looked at it, and then looked at her and said, very quietly, "I don't know what I would do without you here." It came out like something he hadn't planned to say. She sat down across from him and let it be there between them for a moment. "You'd manage," she said. "You managed before. Differently," he said. He picked up his fork and looked at his plate. "I was managing before. This is." He stopped. "This is better." She didn't say anything. She was afraid that if she said anything, the moment would close the way a hand closes around something fragile and damages it through too much pressure. He ate. She ate. The wind worked at the eaves outside, and that was enough. For that night, it was entirely enough. February moved slowly. The cold was starting to loosen at the edges. Not gone, not yet, but suggesting that it eventually would be. And Nora began to feel, tentatively, that she understood the rhythm of the ranch across all its conditions. She understood it the way she had come to understand Edmund. Not by being told, but by sustained, honest observation over time. She had started helping with the books. Not because he had asked her, but because she had a head for numbers, and he had mentioned once that the ledgers had gotten behind during the fence repairs. And she had offered, and he had looked at her with an expression of mild surprise, and said, "If you're willing," and she had sat down at the desk and gotten them current in 2 afternoons, while he stood in the doorway of the study periodically, ostensibly checking on things, actually watching her work. She was aware of being watched. She didn't mind. She had grown accustomed to his attention, not as scrutiny, as regard. The particular quality of being seen by someone who noticed things accurately and without agenda. One afternoon, he brought her coffee while she worked. Set it on the edge of the desk, without comment. She looked up at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them that neither of them had a word for yet, but that had been building since October with the patient. Structural certainty of something that was going to be real. He went back to his work. She drank the coffee and looked at the ledgers and smiled at the page in a way that had nothing to do with the numbers. He told her he loved her on a morning in March, when the first real warmth was finally in the air, and she was hanging washing on the line behind the house. And he came around the corner of the barn and stopped when he saw her and stood there for a moment before walking toward her, and there was something in the way he was walking, deliberate, purposeful, as though he had made a decision somewhere between the barn and the clothesline and was committed to it, that made her go still with the sheet in her hands. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her in that careful, honest way that was simply his way, that she had learned was not performance or strategy or management, just the way Edmund Hale moved through the world, at full presence, when he chose to be present. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. "I didn't marry you for love," he said. "You know that. We both know that. I married you because it was a practical solution to a practical problem, and I thought that was all I was capable of." He paused. He did not look away from her. "I was wrong." The sheet moved in the early spring wind. "I'm not wrong often," he said, "but I was wrong about that." Nora looked at this man, this careful, complicated, quietly extraordinary man who had spent 6 months being more than he had promised to be, without ever drawing attention to the fact that he was doing it, who had fixed floorboards and brought coffee in the cold, and listened to her story about her parents, and told her about his mother's Christmas cake with the particular vulnerability of someone who had decided she was worth being vulnerable with. She felt something in her chest that was warm and certain, and entirely without the shadow of doubt she had carried onto that stage 6 months ago when she signed her name next to his. "Edmund," she said, "you don't have to." He started. "I know I don't," she said. She set down the sheet. She crossed the distance between them. She looked up at him and put her hand against his chest and felt his heart under her palm, steady and real and present. "I fell in love with you somewhere around December," she said. "I've been waiting for a reasonable moment to tell you." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face changed, not dramatically. The way a landscape changes when the light comes right, the same elements suddenly luminous. He put his hand over hers. Warm. Just as warm as the first morning in the church, when he had slid a ring onto her finger, and she had not expected his warmth. She had expected a great many things that had not been true about Edmund Hale, and she was grateful for every one of them. "December," he said. "The Christmas Eve conversation," she said. "Your mother's cake." He was quiet for a moment. Then, there, finally, complete and unguarded, he smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of a man who did not deploy them carelessly, and who therefore, when he used one, meant it entirely. "I'll build you that porch," he said. She looked at him. "What porch? You mentioned once. In January, you said the house would be good with a porch that faces east. Morning light." He looked at her with that directness. "I've been thinking about where to put it." She stared at him. "You remembered that," she said. "I remember everything," he said simply. She thought about what she had told him in December. About love looking like someone paying that much attention. "Yes," she said quietly. "Build me the porch." They were not, as a couple, people who drew attention to themselves. What they were was thorough. Thorough and honest, and present in the particular way of two people who had started from nothing, and built, stone by careful stone, something real. By the following spring, the ranch had a porch that faced east and caught the morning light with an extravagance that made the whole front of the house different. Edmund had built it himself over the course of 3 weeks in March and April, with Walt's help and without ceremony, and when it was done, he had simply told her at breakfast that she could use it now, and she had gone out and stood on it in the early light with her coffee, and felt something that she could only describe as finally. He came out and stood beside her. They watched the morning come over the eastern ridge, the long gold light of it reaching across the fields below, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say that the morning wasn't saying more effectively. His hand found hers at her side. She laced her fingers through his. The ranch spread out below them in every direction, wide and unhurried. The creek catching light at the bottom of the valley, the fields greening after a good winter rain. It looked, she thought, like a place that intended to last, like something worth staying for. She had a letter to write. To her aunt, who had handled the arrangement with such careful efficiency, and who deserved to know that it had become something she had not promised, and perhaps had not entirely expected. Nora thought she would find the right words when she sat down. She usually did these days. She had stopped being afraid of saying the true thing, which tended to simplify the language considerably. The following December, there was a cradle in the room off the kitchen. Edmund had built it from the cottonwood along the creek, working at it in the evenings, by lamplight, with a carpenter's patience and a father's determination to do it right. In the cradle was a child who had Edmund's dark eyes and Nora's habit of watching everything with the careful, interested attention of someone who understood that the world was full of things worth understanding if you paid it enough respect. On Christmas Eve, Nora made the cake. She had spent months working it out. The oranges, the dark spice, the particular dense sweetness of it that she finally got right on the fourth attempt. She set it on the table, and Edmund stood beside her and looked at it for a long moment. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something that went a long way back. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's exactly it." She took his hand. The fire was going. The child was asleep. Outside, the snow was beginning, coming down soft, and even over the south pasture and the eastern ridge and the morning porch and all the wide, unhurried acreage of a ranch that was now, completely and without reservation, home. He had married her out of duty. Love had not been the plan. Love had simply been the truth that showed up anyway, patient and persistent, waiting for two careful people to stop being afraid of it. And here, on a cold December evening, in the middle of an improbable life that neither of them had planned and both of them had built, they were no longer afraid. If this kind of story reaches you, slow and honest and unwilling to rush the parts that matter, there are more waiting right here. Different people, different land. The same stubborn, inconvenient truth that keeps showing up when no one planned for it. Where did this story find you? What corner of the world were you sitting in when these words reached you? Leave it in the comments. I would genuinely like to know. And tell me honestly, what did this story do right, and what could it do better? Your thoughts are how these stories grow.